No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode number 183. And breaking right now, Elon Musk has endorsed Axed Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe to become Prime Minister in his first intervention since the party's civil war exploded. And there's more bad news for Nigel Farage today, with Douglas Murray claiming he is terrified of mass deportations.
It seems to me that's a perfectly reasonable policy. Nigel Farage is clearly terrified of the policy or of saying that. And so instead he's saying, well, it just can't be done. I think there's not much point of a party of the right, particularly one to the right of the Conservatives, that simply says we're going to sit back and not do anything about the existential threats to our country.
So can the party just move on from this? The polling is good. Or is there a revolution coming in British right-wing politics?
Can we just end this stupid row? Because there are so many big things that the Reform Party needs to do to save the country. And so many people are putting their greatest hopes for saving the UK into reform. And every day that this horrible fight goes on is a day that is a distraction from the main business.
So in my digest next, we'll reveal what Rupert Lowe claims Nigel Farage specifically forced him to remove from his landmark conference speech. Then analysis from Connor Tomlinson, contributor to Courage Media and host of the New Culture Forum's Deprogrammed podcast. Also coming up on the show today, Snow White becomes Snow Woke, and it's proving to be a disaster for Disney. And a bombshell development in the Obama's secret split as Michelle's new solo podcast flops. I'll show you some of that and tell you the latest reporting. It's quite something, folks. Then in the Uncancelled Aftershow on Substack, you're not going to believe this, Meghan Markle just been exposed for ripping off her new podcast, Confessions of a Female Founder, from a young Irish influencer. I'm going to show you the shocking proof. www.outspoken.live. Remember, too, you can still vote in our poll for the worst Britain in the world this week. This is where we take the nominees of your Union Jackass choice from throughout the week. So on Monday it was Zia Youssef, Tuesday David Lammy, Wednesday Angela Rayner, Thursday Yvette Cooper. I will announce the worst Britain in the world this week. There are your choices. Goodness gracious me, this is an interesting one. 3 on the left, 1 on the right. But now, let's go. So I don't know about you, but I feel more than a little gaslit this week. Usually sound folk like Matt Goodwin lecturing me that if I believe in the mass deportation of illegals or dual nationals who have been found guilty of committing a crime during their time in the UK, that somehow makes me a hater, a wrecker, stupid, or just completely away with the fairies. I'm not. By the way, like most of you, I'm a perfectly reasonable centrist who knows we have one chance to save our country, and refusing to undo so much of the damage from the past generation, well, I think it just won't cut it. Then I listened to Douglas Murray about what's really going on, and I feel instantly less alone.
Because to my mind, if you say we have perhaps millions of people in the country illegally, many of whom have been carrying out acts of criminality, all of whom carried out an act of criminality by breaking into the country illegally, then they should be made to leave. It seems to me that's a perfectly reasonable policy. Nigel Farage is clearly terrified of the policy or of saying that. And so instead he's saying, well, it just can't be done. I think there's not much point of a party of the right, particularly one to the right of the Conservatives, that simply says we're going to sit back and not do anything about the existential threats to our country. So I think it is actually beyond personalities for once. There's a serious rift here on the right. And it's going to be very interesting to see, because either Reform can continue to be a party where people who are opposed to the mainstream narrative of recent decades can put their trust, or it isn't, and it falls apart as so many small parties have before.
Okay, so Nigel is terrified. And is that because winning means more than anything else? And look, I get that. Totally get that. Of course, you've got to be in power. But cancelling or alienating your base, who will back you to the end of the earth, I think it makes the decisions this week seem truly bizarre. And to say there's no ego in all of this is just naive. Just today, Elon Musk, I've been waiting for this, he's finally waded into the row, endorsing with 2 Union Jacks, Rupert Lowe, when an account called Starmer Out posted one of his inspirational speeches with the words, "Can we please get this man as Prime Minister?" And certainly Rupert isn't backing down, and nor should he. We know this man isn't an extremist. Indeed, the words he told me earlier this week during our Outspoken exclusive were removed from his flagship address at Reform's conference, were actually taken from Farage's #1 ally, Donald Trump, the US president. And Rupert explained a bit more about this today on X, writing, "A clarification, Farage said what I stopped him using was the words repatriation. This is untrue. He removed the following quote from my speech: repel, repatriate, and remove. I have proof." And then he added, "I was directly quoting an executive order from Trump. Important context." So who is right on this? Well, you know I'm being completely fair and balanced, and I want to show you both sides. Here is why Farage says the UK cannot conduct mass deportations.
It's a political impossibility to deport hundreds of thousands of people. We simply can't do it. At the moment, it's a political impossibility.
But is it your ambition?
No. I'm not going to get dragged down the route of mass deportations or anything like that. I mean, people are always going to come and go, and we are a country that's engaged in international trade, and we have relationships around the world through the Commonwealth, etc. But yeah, we have to aim at a balanced migration policy.
But net zero still means hundreds of thousands of people coming into Britain, immigrants coming into Britain. Isn't that too many?
It may well be, but we have to start somewhere.
Trump says in America that he wants mass deportations. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants are in Britain at the moment. Some estimates say the number could even be in, 1 million plus. So do you support deporting all of those people?
It's impossible to do. Literally impossible to do.
In terms of the atmosphere in Britain, are you concerned that there is a rising level of anti-white hatred?
I'm just concerned about a deeply divided society.
Okay. Now here's why Farage says Reform is not an anti-migration party.
I also talked about the rise of parties with similar views of anti-migration parties across Europe.
So who said I'm an anti-migration party?
Well, you did yourself.
No, I didn't. I said the opposite. I said we're pro-control immigration.
Right-leaning parties.
You asked me about high-skilled people, and I said if they come into Britain, bring high skills, pay taxes, and integrate, I've got no problem. Our brand of politics, my brand of politics, is different to many of the other European parties. All right, let's be clear about that. There are similarities, there are crossover points, but there are differences.
Now here's why Farage says no British political movement can neglect the Muslim vote.
But the nub of it is, we have a Muslim population in Britain growing by about 75% every 10 years. Right? That's just where we are.
Mm-hmm.
If we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose.
Mm-hmm.
We'll lose.
So how does one include
We
them?
will lose. By 2050, goodness knows what kind of a terrible state we're going to be in.
Mm-hmm. And here's why Farage says he has realised he's not a populist anymore.
There are various types of populist party on the right across Europe. Which one do you look at and think, there's the template, I can do a bit of that?
I'm not a populist.
Which one do you like?
I'm not a populist.
I've heard you call yourself a populist.
I've realised I'm not. I've realised that's a
It
mistake.
was last week you called yourself a populist.
I am not a populist. If you think about the issues that I
Are
champion...
you rebranding in front of our eyes?
If you think about the issues that I've championed They've nearly all been small minority issues.
It sounds to me like you're trying to create a little bit of distance between yourself and these parties for understandable political reasons. Because some of them are quite scary to British voters.
No. There's no need to draw.
Okay, so that is the Farage position, in his own words. Here's how Rupert Lowe, until this time last week, Reform's best performing MP, disagrees. He writes, "There is nothing controversial whatsoever about calling for the mass deportation of illegal migrants and foreign criminals. I make no apologies for saying so. Nobody can actually explain to me why it's an unreasonable view to take, considering that it's a position shared by a big majority of the British people. It is remarkably underrepresented in Parliament. It doesn't matter if it's 1 million or 2 million or 3 million. The objective has to be deportation. If you're here illegally, you go. If you're a foreign national and you commit a crime, you go. If you break your visa conditions, you go. Any self-respecting country would apply these rules. Why is Britain any different? Why do we tolerate it? We're told it's not possible. Why? Logistics? Total and utter drivel. More than 357.6 million seats were available on flights departing and arriving in the UK in 2024. It can be done. The cost? Well, we managed to find billions to host these young men in hotels and pay for their upkeep. I'm sure a plane ticket home would be seen as a worthy investment. Can't deport them because of the law. Change the sodding law. The Great Repeal Act is required. I find this depressing acceptance that these illegal migrants are here forever so dispiriting. And if you say otherwise, you're some cruel monster. Who cares what these people think? We will never win them over. It does not matter. Call it what you want, but I support mass deportations, and you should too." So that's the very clear Rupert Lowe response to Farage. Now let's move on to the pure politics. It seems Reform insiders have realised just how much the past 7 days has devastated its base, with at least 10,000 memberships, I'm told, cancelled.
This is why I think it's always tremendously naive when people, when they go off in a strop, as has happened with Rupert Lowe, they talk about setting up, or they make noises about setting up their own party. It's really, really damn difficult to build a political party from scratch and get that recognition for the party, never mind the people that are in the party. And you said at the opening, Ian, that I've got some opinions on this story, and I do, and I think they'd be the opinions that are shared with many of our listeners, which is A, that Rupert Lowe has done a really good job in some areas as an MP, and he works really hard, and that's great. But B, can we just end this stupid row? Because there are so many big things that the Reform Party needs to do to save the country, and so many people are putting their greatest hopes for saving the UK into Reform, and every day that this horrible fight goes on is a day that is a distraction from the main business.
Carl Benjamin responded, I think, fairly by arguing, is it going off in a strop when they drum up false charges, report you to the police, and then kick you out of the party? An online campaign visit by Sly News with the brilliant Lincolnshire mayoral candidate Andrea Jenkins, one of Reform's greatest signings, in my opinion, the issue was indeed raised by punters.
But then, unprompted, this happened. A reference to the row between suspended Reform MP Rupert Lowe and the party leadership.
I follow Rupert on Twitter or X, whatever you call it, and I look at it. Look, I don't follow politics avidly, but I just look and I just think, this man's full of common sense, and I really like him. And then I just see I don't really know what has happened, but it just looks from a complete outsider's point of view. He's just been chucked under the bus, and I'm like, am I getting second thoughts about Reform?
Spats happen all the time. It just looks worse when it's a smaller party because there's less of them, so it's more noticeable. This will blow over, but Reform will keep getting strong.
How concerned are you about the infighting?
Look, I was in the Conservative Party for all those years, and it was infighting on steroids, wasn't it, really? I was probably partly to blame, calling PMs to resign. But I'm putting it into perspective, actually, Beth.
It's more than a spat, though.
Yeah,
it's more than a spat.
I mean, clearly it's a big falling out. There's concerns on both sides. Politicians and media, we might spend a lot of time on X and on social media, but it doesn't always cut through to the general public.
I mean, the fact that someone raised it unprompted. I didn't raise Rupert Lowe this morning.
No.
And he said, I'm concerned about it. It's like you left the Conservative Party to an outfit that was meant to do politics differently, and now they look like they're all fighting like rats in a sack.
Look, I can see what it looks like, Beth, and I'm not one to mince my words. It doesn't look great, agreed. You know, this has got to have its day. I don't want to see it in the news any more days. We've got to actually focus on winning now.
Yeah, and I feel sorry for Andrea Jenkins because, you know, she deserves to win that mayoralty. But the Civil War, unfortunately, has provided a genuine boost to the Conservatives, with their peer Daniel Hannan arguing for reform to make the transition from protest to potential party of government. It needs a shadow cabinet. It needs dozens of big beasts, men and women with their own profiles. After last week, I am left wondering whether it will ever have more than one. And the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, has continued his obvious charm offensive to secure a Rupert Lowe defection.
Place on the Tory benches for Rupert Lowe?
Well, look, I mean, the Conservative Party is a broad church, and we're always, you know, willing to welcome new people to our ranks. I certainly haven't had any discussion with Rupert Lowe. I'm not aware that anyone else has either, and obviously there is a police investigation, so I don't really want to kind of comment on the specifics of that case. I would say, however, that Rupert Lowe has been, I think, treated appallingly by Reform and by Nigel Farage in particular. You know, he spoke his mind a week or so ago and has been subject to all kinds of vicious and vitriolic attack subsequently. And what may well be, and these allegations are put in the public domain within 24 hours, apparently for motivations of essentially revenge. And I think people will look at the way Reform generally and Nigel Farage in particular have treated Rupert Lowe, and they will be pretty appalled by what they see.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm sorry. I'm still not over this one. You know, I respect Matt Goodwin. I respect the fact that he might tell me to forget social media and look at the polls. But the treatment of Rupert Lowe was barbaric, and it's impossible to just move on, pretend it hasn't happened. After all, here is the speech that saw Elon Musk endorse the great Yarmouth MP today.
Trump and the Americans, it has made me even more determined than ever to restore our unique country through a great repeal act when Labour falls at the next election. I don't particularly care if we're liked by the rest of the world. I care if we're respected, because right now Britain is a joke, and it has been for some time. I want the British government to put the British people at the top of the agenda. Yeah! We should make no apologies for that. Learn from Trump. Let's be unapologetically patriotic. Slash tax across the board. Enforce the border. Deport those with no right to be here. Accept biological reality. Fight back against wokery. Bulldoze nonsensical foreign aid. Eradicate DEI. Deliver sensible infrastructure. Carpet bomb public sector waste. Brutally crack down on crime. And plenty more. Let's make Great Britain great again. Thank you. Thank you.
And now Connor Tomlinson is today's outsider. Connor Tomlinson, who's right here? Matt Goodwin or Douglas Murray?
Obviously, Rupert Lowe, Douglas Murray. I came up with this rule a little while ago for Reform as one of its friendly critics or critical friends. That is, if Douglas Murray is saying it's stronger, you're losing. Well, allow me to correct that. If you've lost Douglas Murray, you've lost. Frankly, I'm surprised that many people thought that Nigel Farage was on board with deportations all this time. He seemed to signal that he was running to catch up to the Trump administration in a video in January when he said that, look, Trump has promised to deport illegal immigrants. Our countries may be different, but the principle is the same. But it seems now that it's not just a optical aversion to deportations that Nigel Farage has. It seems to be a principled aversion, because he took to the Telegraph and he decided to confirm the fact that he stripped the phrase mass deportations out of Rupert Lowe's Northwest Essex speech, and he called it dark and dangerous rhetoric. So that seems to be a personal kind of ick towards upholding a single tier of justice and a single rule of law for immigration. Because if you allow illegal immigrants, as Winston Marshall tried to press him on, to just mill about in Britain, the 2 million foreign criminals, and they're all foreign criminals that have all broken the law by either overstaying their visas or crossing the channel in small boats. If you allow between 1.2 and up to or even exceeding 2 million foreign criminals in this country to exist on the cost of the taxpayer. At the moment, it's 14.4 billion a year, as Andrea Jenkins calculated when she was in Parliament. Labour are going to increase that to 32 billion a year because they're going to hide it in the welfare budget. If you allow that, you are exploiting the very British people that you purport to represent. And so Rupert Lowe is being unapologetic in his insistence to uphold a single tier of the law. He's right in that we facilitate over 130 million people flying in and out of British airports every single year. So it's just a matter of identifying these foreign criminals and picking and choosing our favored airlines so that they can be sent back to their countries with haste. We can do what Robert Jenrick's suggested, again, being to the right of Farage. Whether or not it's sincere is up to the question, but Farage shouldn't have at least allowed his rightward flank to be open. But we can levy penalties in terms of foreign aid and visas against nations like Pakistan if they don't want to take their illegal migrants or foreign rapists back to their nations of origins. Trump has done this with Colombia, and look how quickly they folded. And I'm pretty sure our friends across the pond that have just been put in place in the new Trump administration will be more than happy to give us the blueprint. And one final thing, Dan, as for political expediency, 58% of the British public support Trump's deportation plan. And that's when you take it away from President Trump's name and just say, should Britain deport illegal immigrants? That was in the Telegraph. Matt Goodwin himself knows in his Why the Left Lost post on Substack that the opposition to those policies, radical progressivism who want to abolish our borders and allow no human to be illegal, is only 8 to 10% of the electorate. So why are reform not only chasing that part of the electorate, who will always call them racist and never vote for them anyway, but making it their official party position? And the idea that Nigel Farage isn't a populist, well, do you know who might disagree with that? I've got this book on my shelf here. It's Matt Goodwin's. Funnily enough, the definition of populism in this book, and I'll read it to you, although populism is often dismissed as merely a style, we have argued that it is a thin ideology in its own right, based on 3 core values. Number 1, an attempt to make the popular will heard and acted on. Number 2, the call to defend the interests of the plain, ordinary people. And number 3, the desire to replace corrupt and distant elites. So the opposite of populism is elitism and a refusal to strip out the corrupt, ideologically captured bureaucrats in the civil service. If Nigel Farage is saying, I'm not a populist, then he is promising that, unfortunately. And so if Rupert Lowe is promising populism, I'm with Rupert Lowe.
Then Matt Goodwin would say to you, Connor, though, he's looking at the polling, and despite everything that's happened, look at this from Lord Ashcroft today, suggesting that Reform is on track to win Mike Amesbury's seat, which would just be, I mean, the most incredible turnaround from the general election. So can you understand why Reform insiders say, this is working for us? Okay, it might annoy you, might annoy Douglas Murray, but this is working for us as an electoral strategy.
So there's a few things on that. First of all, don't forget that Lord Ashcroft was the man who helped make Rishi Sunak's career after being introduced to him by Dougie Smith and Munira Mirza. So bear in mind that polls are meant to shape public opinion, just as they are meant to register public opinion, and who's doing the shaping really matters. Also, the person doing Reform's internal polling now is not Matt Goodwin, but Chris Bruni-Lowe, the man who scuppered Nigel Farage's 2015 South Thanet seat run, and who went to work for the Rishi Sunak leadership campaign against Liz Truss, and then has now been hired for some perplexing reason by Reform UK. Another series of questionable hires that make it look like they're drifting closer to the Uniparty from within. As well, the other point is that, and bear in mind that the people like Isabel Oakeshott, who gleefully smiled like the Cheshire Cat when she thought she was getting her claws into Rupert on the day they were calling the police on him, are now saying, a bit like a girlfriend moving the goalposts and gaslighting you once you started to win the argument, oh, can we just drop it? Why do you really care anyway? The reason that they're doing that is because, one, calling the police on an MP for, let's say, charges that seem mendacious and alleged threats that don't really seem credible if they happened months ago, is the wrong thing to do. But it's also going to put off some of your star talent from joining the party. Dan Hannan is right about this. Why would anyone with a public profile and prestige and competence and threefold want to join Reform if the risk of having the police called on them is hung over their head?
Totally.
When, as Farage seems to have admitted in his latest Sky News interview, it wasn't because of actually doing something wrong, it was because Rupert was perceived as challenging his throne and sowing division from within. And the final thing I will say is, we've got some polling of our own. If you look at YouGov this week, a third, so it's 34% of the party, want Nigel Farage to remain as the leader. Now, we're told that Reform is nothing without Nigel Farage. Another third want Nigel Farage replaced, and another third are indifferent. So literally only a third of Reform's core voters are Farage loyalists. And a bit of stroll polling for myself, I have been told that only the very online right want mass deportations. Bear in mind, Matt Goodwin, I like Matt very much, but he said that in a reply to me and in a tweet about Rupert, that Rupert was calling for the deportation of British nationals. He's never said that. He's only ever said foreign nationals and dual citizens who have committed crimes. So let's get that straight. So it's a false conflation to say that you want like BNP-style policies of repatriating British nationals. But anyway, point being, Reform's own voter base want mass deportations. And I know this because I was the first person to call for it at Reform's conference on its stage, and a room full of its members, its paying members who came to see Farage, Lowe and the like speak, burst into applause. So Reform's modus operandi should, as Douglas Murray said, to be breaking from the uniparty consensus of mass immigration and to reply to illegal migration with mass deportations. It's what its voters expect. And if they won't do that, then what is the point of them?
Doesn't matter if the public at this point don't know who Rupert Lowe is, but they are very familiar with Nigel Farage. This has been part of the civil war breaking out on the right this week. Let me show you some of the arguments. Jess Gill posted, it doesn't matter if the average person hasn't heard of Rupert Lowe. Most people prefer to avoid politics in their daily lives. My sister, for example, didn't even know who Keir Starmer was until months after he became Prime Minister. The point is that Rupert Lowe's popularity has surged since his election, and it will only continue to grow. Anyone who truly cares about their country would only need a moment to see his character, principles, and recognise him as the right choice. However, Matt Goodwin, the Reform-supporting academic and GB News host, says a reality check for Twitter world. Here's the favourability ratings of Reform MPs. Look at the don't knows, aka I've never heard of this person. So 8% have never heard of Nigel Farage, 63% have never heard of Richard Tice, 60% have never heard of Lee Anderson, 68% have never heard of Rupert Lowe. Carl Benjamin of Lotus Eaters argued in response to that, however, brand recognition works both ways. People who hate Farage and will never vote for him also know who he is. This is the problem of Kamala Harris. It would have been better to have an empty suit start at 0 approval rather than negative 30. It's bizarre that they think this is important. You can only choose famous people as party leaders. What preposterous nonsense is that? Being the party leader is what makes you famous. Not being famous makes you the party leader. So Connor Tomlinson, contributor to Courage Media and co-host of the Deprogrammed podcast on the New Cultural Forum. Where do you stand on this one? Is Nigel Farage's name recognition, the fact that he is, let's just be honest about this, one of the most famous people in the country, a man who would stop every pub if he were to walk in, and let's be honest, most people would want to have a pint with him. Is that important or not?
It can be a net asset. I mean, look at Donald Trump. He spent far less on his initial presidential campaign than Hillary Clinton did, trading off with the fact that everyone knew who Trump was, not least because he had his name emblazoned on a big gold building in the middle of New York. But Trump used that name recognition to then push the Overton window in a direction that gave the silent majority of Americans permission to voice concerns on previously radioactive topics like the global outsourcing of manufacturing, or, of course, immigration. Predominantly illegal immigration in America because of their porous southern border, but over in the UK, it's legal and illegal immigration alike, because we have as much illegal immigration every year as America does as a country on the whole, and we're the size of New York State, and they're basically a continent. So if Nigel Farage was using his name recognition to give more permission to the silent majority of the British public, it would be an unbelievable electoral asset, and he would have my unmitigated praise for it, because Farage clearly has got some accomplishments under his belt. His name is synonymous with Brexit around the world, for example, and this is why Rita Panahi on Sky News, when Douglas Murray pointed out that Farage has run away from mass deportations, was shocked, because it's almost like everyone who supports reform presumes that Farage is an immigration hardliner at the same level of Donald Trump or Rupert Lowe. So it's actually frustrating that Farage isn't using his name recognition, isn't using his unique position of resilience to create more room to maneuver for those beneath him in reform or the broader public at large, for whom advancing these positions comes with more reputational costs. Even professional costs. You still can be sacked from your job because of the potency of cancel culture in this country, and Farage knows this best of anyone because of the debanking crisis, right? So Farage should be using that name recognition to make those with less name recognition, make it safer for them to voice the concerns that they think that he stands for. Unfortunately, he's not doing that. And so what can happen is the level of people that really don't like Farage and have very set views will never be moved. But they're still chasing those people's votes anyway by softening their position. So they're making inroads with the wrong people. Instead, what Rupert Lowe can do is not just grow his brand and pick up people as he goes along without preconceived notions of who he is limiting that ability, but also he can appeal to different constituencies that he's personally lived out. So in the same way that President Trump rebranded himself as kind of a kindly grandfather from the beleaguered, defeated, convicted felon that he was only in 2022 to the broader public. I mean, I've always liked the guy personally. Rupert Lowe can fashion himself as having credibility with the farmers who reform want to pick up because of the protests, but Lowe is a farmer himself. He's a successful businessman. He seems to have had a pretty squeaky clean record. It's not blighted by drug habits or extramarital affairs, as lots of other MPs in Parliament are. Read Nadine Dorries' book, for example. He's very popular with, let's say, the online right, but as we know, Twitter is pretty much real life now, because X was a successful barometer for public mood during the American election when Trump won the popular vote. And he's very popular with, and this is just anecdotal experience, young men. Like all of the young guys that went to Reform Conference, the young lads involved in, let's call the new right or the Zoomer right, look up to Rupert Lowe as a leadership figure. And so if he can bring all of these different neglected fiefdoms of the country and the national populist movement together, then he can essentially do a kind of Magna Carta to Nigel Farage, who, yeah, is the presumptive king of the right, but he's kind of acting a bit like a King John at the moment, neglecting his barons. And so he could either petition Farage to catch up to him, or act a bit like a King Richard coming back from the Crusades and possibly even take over.
Then, of course, we have quite a separate issue in terms of the police. And what's interesting, Connor, is that the police, it feels like, are being weaponized now with reform's rivals. I'm going to show you a situation in Scotland in just one moment. But first, I wanted to remind people of what Rupert Lowe told me earlier in the week about why it was wrong that he had been reported to the Metropolitan Police, who have since launched an investigation because of a hurty words argument with Reform's chairman, Zia Youssef. Watch. So what is being said, and no one has reported this, but what is being said, and I believe it's untrue, but I want to give you the opportunity to say it's untrue, that you threatened to slit Zia Youssef's throat in that meeting.
Dan, that's not right. What I did say after Friday was that the party had just slit its own throat. That's what I said about the party. I haven't.
So you weren't making a threat to him?
I didn't say that to Zia, by the way. I said that to my staff, and I maintain that. I think this is a most mysterious and an extraordinary decision that was made. And, you know, so no, I haven't spoken to Zia or communicated with him as far as I'm aware.
And now we have a case in Scotland. Let me show you this from The National, which is a nutty newspaper, but the fact remains a Scottish Reform UK councillor, Thomas Kerr, has been reported to the police over a possible hate crime. He posted a video on social media suggesting foreign nationals should be deported if found to be stalking women in Glasgow. Now, I want to show you that video so you can make a judgment about whether he should have been reported to the police for it.
Hi folks, it's Thomas. Now I normally come on to do these videos in a bit more positivity, but today I'm absolutely fizzing about an interview in an article in Glasgow Live that I've just read, which you'll see below, about the horrific abuse and how scared many women, particularly young women, are feeling here in Glasgow about going out in the city centre and about going about their day-to-day business. It's absolutely horrific, and I'm fizzing at the fact that not many politicians are standing up for women. Not many politicians are coming on to do these videos to say enough is enough. There are so many women in this country who are scared and who are worried. Now, I'm a brother of a 14-year-old sister. I'm a fiance of a 26-year-old young woman as well. And I am petrified when they're out in the city centre because of some of the horrific stories that we are reading in the newspapers and seeing online and hearing people speak about. It is shocking. And politicians are too scared to challenge it. Let me be very, very clear. Any foreign national or an immigrant or asylum seeker who stalks, abuses or physically puts a woman in scared of their safety should be kicked out of this country. No ifs, no buts, final, and that's it. And no politician has the guts to say that. And it's shocking, it is shameful. We have seen a massive erosion of women's rights in this country. Safe spaces, stupid arguments about what is a woman, all this nonsense that has eclipsed our entire political system here in Scotland. I know what a woman is. I will always stand up for women's rights, and it's time more politicians do the same.
Now, Connor Tomlinson, the SNP councillor Alan Casey, said of that video, Thomas Kerr's comments are exactly the type of language that fueled riots across the rest of the UK just months ago. They are dangerous, stupid, and potentially put the safety of thousands of people across Glasgow at risk. Rightly, the people who were found to instigate those riots went to jail. So, I mean, that's how the left are going to weaponise this. But isn't the problem for Reform UK here the fact that they have reported Rupert Lowe to the police? So just be careful, because have they not opened up the gates of hell for their rivals to now do the same on them time and again?
Well, firstly, yes. I mean, it's not that the opposition needed any encouragement to make bogus claims of bigotry or even report people to the police for hurty words. I mean, look at Yvette Cooper promising to ramp up the use of non-crime hate incidents even after the police, despite Suella Braverman's attempts to legislate them into remission, recording even more than ever. But the problem Reform has now, and this is particularly Zia Youssef's fault and whoever around him, if any, encouraged him to report these so-called threats to the police nearly 4 months after they happened. The problem is, if you're going to accuse two-tier Keir of being overzealous in policing ill-advised rage rhetoric on Facebook and X from Judy Sweeney or Lucy Connolly, for example, how are you going to stand up for them when, especially the rhetoric from Rupert Lowe morphs over time from he's going to slit Zia Youssef's throat to he's going to slit the party's throat to warning the party would slit its own throat, which seems pretty prescient. But again, those are all just words. Words from a 67-year-old man to a man in his mid-30s who is followed around by bodyguards at all times. So no, these threats don't seem credible. They didn't seem imminent, given they waited nearly 4 months to put them out. And they seem to have misread where Reform's voter base is, because Reform's voters are the last people to be sympathetic to reporting someone to the police for speech. The other point about this, I've just done an interview with the wonderful Louise Perry for her Maiden Mother Matriarch podcast. She's just had David Betts on, for example, to talk about how ethnic and religious conflict is driving the UK towards civil war. And we catch that off by saying, okay, what kind of conditions are being done with that? And this chap, this Scottish candidate, is absolutely right. Not only the government actively gaslighting members of the public by keeping crime statistics from them and telling the grieving victims of terror attacks like the parents in Southport or the Manchester Arena bombing, don't look back in anger, this has nothing to do with immigration and Islam, anytime someone takes the Quran a bit too seriously and kills and maims their daughters. But also, government policy is proactively endangering women. Immigration is a women's safety issue. We've just had an Afghan asylum seeker go through the courts for sexually assaulting a woman in an English town. We've just had information from the Centre for Migration Control published in the Telegraph that shows that foreign nationals are responsible for 23% of sex crimes. That's foreign nationals, by the way. It's not broken down by second and third generation migrants, I suspect. The statistic is much higher. We just don't have the data to hand. And some foreign nationals like Afghans and Eritreans are a factor of like 77 times more likely to commit those offenses than British nationals. And we shouldn't be shocked because lots of these men are coming from countries where women are treated as property and chattel. So if we know that rates of child marriage, female genital mutilation, acid attacks, rape, sexual assaults, and honor killings are much higher in those nations of origins, one, we should be excluding men from coming from those countries completely. I think there's no trade-off where, you know, one nuclear scientist is worth a dozen Pakistani rape gangs, for example. But number two, we shouldn't be persecuting people for talking about this phenomena when we just know it's the case. One final instance I'll use, Dan, if I may, and this is why Reform should know about this. One of the stories that I helped break on, and I'm sorry to mention it, GB News, in August 2023, was African, mainly Moroccan and Algerian people traffickers using TikTok and Instagram to advertise their people trafficking services to prospective illegal migrants. And in there, they spliced photos and images of young women in towns across England, on nights out, drunk, in states of undress, kind of depicting them as willing and up for being taken by these men who are traveling over from that part of the world, as if they're kind of the spoils of war and conquest. And this was known to the Home Office, and the Home Office took no action. And it was shared and reported on GB News at the time, including on Nigel Farage's show. So if we know that this is the stated intent of those men from those part of the world who are willing to break the law to come into our country, and they say our women and girls that way, how many more rapes and sexual assaults need to happen before people get a grip and just say, all of these violent foreign offenders should be sent home, every single illegal migrant should be sent home, and we should not put one more of our women and girls at risk with mass immigration policy just because we want to seem nice, cuddly, and anti-racist at the dinner parties.
Breaking right now, disaster for Disney. After Snow White becomes Snow Woke, and the budget of the movie is probably never ever going to be made back up because of the huge backlash against this film for a whole load of reasons. So the UK premiere has been cancelled altogether. There will be no red carpet at the US premiere. The tracking numbers for this movie are absolutely disastrous. And it's because, of course, Disney decided to turn this beautiful fairy tale into something pushing woke ideology. One of the big issues is this woman here, Rachel Zegler, the Latino actress who was hired to take on the iconic role, but posted after the election of Donald Trump that there was a deep, deep sickness in the United States, taking aim at 77 million Americans who voted for Trump. She said that she hoped Trump supporters and Trump voters and Trump himself never know peace. Now, not surprisingly, that hasn't gone down well in MAGA world, which is threatening a complete boycott of this movie. What's more is that in an interview with Gal Gadot, who plays the evil queen, Rachel Zegler actually said that the original story of Snow White wasn't even going to be kept.
Bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
Snow White is running for president.
I'm launching my campaign. I am.
Wonder why that didn't go down well with middle America. Then let me tell you about the Seven Dwarfs. This is absolutely nuts. The Seven Dwarfs, right? Big part of Snow White. And you would think this was a great opportunity for dwarf actors who are pretty much not that in demand these days. There were no munchkins in the new Wicked movie. You think it would be a good opportunity for them to get some work. Oh, no. First up, as a result of criticism from that dude, Peter Dinklage, you would see that the Seven Dwarfs were not dwarfs at all. They were sort of a lineup of DEI hires with only one short guy. Then Disney, after that didn't rate well in the test performances, said, okay, we're just going to get rid of the dwarfs altogether. They're gone, and we're going to replace them by CGI, even though this is meant to be a live action movie. Now, after the premiere of the film, that dude, the voice of Grumpy, Martin Kleber, has spoken out to TMZ and said, actually, shame on Disney for not allowing me this opportunity to have a red carpet premiere. Variety reported this week that even in the heart of Hollywood, where usually Disney invites dozens of media outlets and lays out the red carpet, none of that will be happening. Instead, there is just going to be one house crew, effectively meaning they don't trust Rachel Zegler to say a word. What an absolute mess. And actually, Connor Tomlinson, contributor to Courage Media, co-host of the Deprogrammed podcast with the New Culture Forum, is this not the ultimate example of go woke, go broke? Why on earth would any of us want to go and see this complete bastardization of Snow White, which Disney created in a different era when they were trying to shove woke ideology down our throat?
Yeah, well, Disney's been creatively bankrupt and ideologically brain rotted for some time now. I remember going to see the Star Wars sequels, The Force Awakens, back in 2015, when all of the directors, cast and crew were wearing the Force's female t-shirts. And what ended up there was they wandered so deep down a creative cul-de-sac by trying to promote feminist ideology in a Star Wars film that they killed off all the original cast and had the granddaughter of the arch villain basically commit familial genocide against the Skywalkers and then self-identify as one at the end, as if the entire audience meant to stand up and clap for collectively destroying their childhood. Yeah, this just looks like a rank embarrassment. Who wants to watch Snow White prance about the forest wondering which Fortune 500 company she might ascend to as a sort of DEI hire? And then her cavalcade of non-specific diverse individuals. One, the costume design looks like something like a community theatre, and two, they don't exactly inspire much in terms of remembering even which one is which. And then the CGIs look terrible. Most of the stuff that Disney does on a soundstage these days, I mean, you can't really suspend disbelief at it. Anyone whose eyes were subjected to She-Hulk twerking can't scrub that from their memory, and that costs, hundreds of millions to put together. Basically, Disney should just go back to the drawing board. They've not done anything particularly good since the 90s in terms of their core animation. Pixar has been dead since the 2010s. Marvel has been dead for like the last 5 or 6 years. If anyone's looked at the box office of Captain America, Brave New World, another woke Frankensteinian creation that even got boycotted by their own side because it had an Israeli superhero in it, Maya and My How the Tables Have Turned, they should see that, pushing DEI down our throats and putting the best superhero characters to the back of the queue just isn't working. And I think that probably, judging by how badly this press tour is going, they put Dopey the Dwarf in charge of it.
Yes, they very much did. And I mean, goodness me, Connor, this has been a complete disaster all over social media. The first trailer received 1.4 million dislikes on YouTube. The second, almost 900,000 dislikes. And why I think they're so stupid is there is a way to get through a movie like this without being uber woke. And the example is Wicked. Now, look, I know Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo were absolutely awful in all of their interviews promoting the movie, and that put a lot of people off going to see it, right? Because it was uber woke. But the movie itself wasn't, Connor. And even Ben Shapiro on the Daily Wire, who was very much expecting, I think, to hate the movie, said, actually, this is really, really good because it felt old school, it felt classic. And sure, there are a couple of references to things that you might view as a little bit woke, but it wasn't a dominant theme of the movie in any way. And guess what, Connor? It was a massive commercial success. Just keep politics out of family movies is surely the message.
Well, I don't think you can make it apolitical because obviously every film is trying to communicate a kind of value. Instead, trying to communicate something wholesome is better. Let's think of like the best Disney films, right? One of the best ones in the 90s, Hercules, okay? It's a story about an adopted son growing to reach his potential, becoming a hero, the woman in the story being embittered by a lost love, decides to make a personal sacrifice. He decides to sacrifice in turn for her. He ascends to godhood, and then he decides, you know what, I'd rather live an earthly life with my earthly family and be happily married and serve the people. Great message. Same with the first Incredibles film, right? The second Incredibles film had Mrs. Incredible leave her family, go be a girl boss, and save literally Hillary Clinton. Completely forgettable and bastardized. But the first Incredibles film is about the sort of virtues of being a man, why you might lose sight of the glory days when you become a dad, and then realizing actually, no, it's in taking care of your family and being surrounded by them, which is what the meaningful role of a man is. It's not just being out for yourself and being a glory hunter and trying to relive your 20s. All those messages were hits, they're instant classics, they're timeless, and they did well at the box office. Now let's look at Disney's most recent ventures. Even the early live action remakes that did quite well at the box office. I'm thinking Aladdin and Lion King. Lion King was uninspiring compared to the original. And then Aladdin, again, they decided to contort Princess Jasmine's storyline as rather than appropriate for the time and place of its setting, trying to pick a suitor for herself and subordinating her firebrand personality to the kind of man that could defend her against the giant snake of Jafar. Instead, she wanted power. She wanted to be a sultan. So this is the reason that actually all of these narratives are entirely corrupted. It's because they don't see everything as a series of relationships. They don't see it as characters gaining in virtue. What they see it as marginalized members of various communities struggling to empower themselves. And so much like Captain Marvel, much like Aladdin, much like the new Snow White, you can't have a healthy relationship between a man and a woman in the story. You can't have wholesome character growth. Instead, the character has to start out as oppressed, and at the end, they have to end up as empowered because that's the only modern woke hero narrative. The characters themselves don't need to be virtuous, as Rachel Zegler clearly herself isn't. She just needs to end up with that C-suite executive job at the end of it. And frankly, it doesn't tap into human intuitions, and it's not very interesting for families, which is why it's probably going to flop.
Oh, I think it will absolutely flop. That the tracking numbers are terrible. Can I ask you about the whole dwarf thing, Connor? Because the problem is, right, I remember growing up and being told, oh, no, you can't say dwarfs, you have to say little people. But now I'm like, is that offensive? I don't know. And I was really shocked by what Peter Dinklage actually said about this, because he was speaking on the WTF with Mark Maron podcast back in January last year. And this got Disney to change its whole strategy about the dwarfs. And he said, literally, no offense to anything, but I was sort of taken aback. They were very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White, but you're still telling the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Take a step back and look at what you're doing there. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, what are you saying? You're a little person and you don't want there to be the Seven Dwarfs. Do you see what I'm saying? I found that very odd because he's actually taking work away from actual little people actors and actresses.
Yeah, he's pulling the very short ladder up after himself. It's funny because he decided to play Tyrion Lannister for many years, a character whose dwarfism is central to his role, but whose intellect makes him an interesting character. And so that didn't mean that the audience ever, so to speak, looked down on him in that way. He was also very happy in the early 2000s to play a dwarf publisher in Elf and be subjected to short jokes through that, and he got a handsome paycheck and probably royalties for that. So it's just because modern political correctness allows him to manufacture this outrage now, he's coming out and doing it. I'm actually much on more of the side of the actor who you said voices grumpy, but I know him for playing Marty in Pirates of the Caribbean, one of the casts of characters who had a very humorous joke where he had an oversized gun and got shot back in At World's End. Yeah, just have short actors play dwarves, because nobody thought that there being seven dwarves was demeaning. Like, we didn't think lesser of the dwarves because they were short. you're absurd. This is clearly an insecurity on your part. And Disney have now just shot themselves in the foot, first by casting a hideous, diverse cadre of characters that nobody wants to remember, and then layering over it with bad CGI when they could have just hired 7 dwarf actors in the first place to do a perfectly serviceable job.
It does make me laugh, though, because Disney is really struggling with this new MAGA era, right? Because Dana Walden, who is one of their most senior executives, best friends with Kamala Harris. And she was viewed as being a shoo-in to take over as chief executive in the coming months. And obviously now that friendship has put her under a lot of scrutiny, and in fact it may mean that she doesn't get the job. But there you go. Connor Tomlinson, do stand by, because an extraordinary development in the story of the Obama's marriage trouble and the involvement of Jennifer Aniston. You're not going to want to miss this reporting. You're certainly not going to get it in the mainstream media. So much more with Connor in just 1 minute. But first, do you know that sleeping less than 6 hours per night doubles the risk of early death? Poor sleep is also linked to obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, depression, and a weakened immune system. Now, I've struggled with sleep for a while. I tried everything, but found it difficult to wind down and get to sleep before 2 a.m. And I'm not alone. The CDC reports over 35% of adults in the US sleep less than the recommended 7 hours. Many sleep supplements contain melatonin and other ingredients that create dependencies, cause morning grogginess, and lose their effectiveness over time. So that's why I take Evening Bean. It's a brand new product by Verso. After 3 years of perfecting the formula, they created a melatonin-free drink mix with clinically studied patented ingredients. It's formulated to calm an active mind, help you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and improve deep and REM sleep, all without creating dependencies or causing morning grogginess. I actually look forward to drinking it every night, because not only does it help me fall asleep faster, but it actually tastes so good. It's become my new nightcap. By the way, totally fine if you're vegan or keto. So click the link in the show description or head on over to evening.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code outspoken at checkout to save 15% on your first order. Try Evening Bean tonight. Wake up feeling refreshed tomorrow. That's evening.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code outspoken to save 15%. That's at checkout. And by the way, you can just click on the link in the description box below if that's easier. But now, back to the show. Breaking right now, an astonishing development in the growing marriage difficulties, to put it quite lightly, between Barack and Michelle Obama, given the long involvement of Jennifer Aniston, the Hollywood actress. Now, you'll remember that I first reported this news back a couple of months ago after a lot of research was done by the brilliant Jessica Reed Krause. She is the author of the House in Habit Substack, which has been reporting lots of news over the past couple of years that the mainstream media simply will not touch. She has just revealed that the rumor is now confirmed. Let me take you through her extraordinary reporting. Jessica Reed Krause writes, back in January, I predicted a split. Too many divided sightings, too much distance, and her absence at the inauguration was telling. From the outset, they appeared to be leading separate lives. But the biggest story was whispers of his affair. For months, rumors of him and the actress weren't just idle gossip. They came from well-placed sources on both coasts, the kind of people who would know. And if there's one thing Hollywood women can't do, it's keep a good scandal quiet. Trust me, I lived through Depp versus Heard. Today, I got unexpected confirmation from a longtime friend connected to LA's elite circles. She's never been one for gossip, but reached out unprompted. You were right, she wrote. I don't want to believe it, but it's true. And it's getting around. The twist. Reportedly an open marriage arrangement which might help sidestep a messy public split. But make no mistake, Jen with the good hair isn't just a passing fling. West Coast ladies say she is embedded in his world, too serious to be dismissed. Will they eventually go public? So astonishing reporting there from Jessica Reed Krause. You will remember, of course, that Michelle Obama didn't show not only to Trump's inauguration, which maybe you could explain for political reasons, but also avoided the funeral right there of Jimmy Carter, a Democratic president, causing Barack to have to sit next to Donald Trump, where actually they seem to get on very, very well. Connor Tomlinson is a contributor to Courage Media and co-host of the Deprogrammed podcast on the New Culture Forum. Connor, this is fascinating, isn't it? Because Michelle Obama is currently in a new act of her career. I'll come to that shortly. It's not going particularly well. And clearly her absence from Jimmy Carter's funeral and the Trump inauguration really set the cat amongst the pigeons about what is going on in the marriage. But should anyone care if they have an arrangement like Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith? I mean, they had that open relationship for decades, and it only became public quite recently.
Well, I don't think it did wonders for Will Smith's psychological stability.
That's true.
Something to go by, but I think so. Without getting into the messy and sordid details of people's personal lives, I'm interested in the implications for this come, let's say, 2027, 2028, when the Democratic Party has a field bereft of presidential talent, and they will be circling the drain as to who to appoint. And Michelle Obama was rumored to be, lined up for stepping in for Joe Biden last time, but either she didn't want to do it or she realized just how much of a mountain it would be to climb to pick up the broken pieces of the Biden administration in order to defeat President Trump. And so she decided against it. But could she make a bid for it, especially if she is on her own? One must wonder as to whether or not detaching herself from Barack Obama, whose legacy has been revisited in recent years as one of perpetuating racial division and empowering Black Lives Matter with the hoaxes of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown being racially motivated killings. They weren't. Or the fact that he endangered the US in various foreign policy ventures and entrapped them in forever wars that cost a lot of American blood and treasure to not really root out global terrorism. And in fact, actively dismantled the US's ability to monitor Islamic terrorists from the Department of Homeland Security and the like, saying that Islam is the religion of peace, etc., while the likes of Anwar al-Awlaki were causing all sorts of disruption in the US. People are revisiting Obama's legacy and thinking it wasn't quite as rosy as first thought out. And this was very evident by the fact that they felt the need to deploy Barack Obama when Kamala Harris took over from Joe Biden to go around talking to who he called the brothers, a bunch of Black men who are usually a consolidated client group for the Democrats, to try and convince them to come out and vote for Kamala Harris, who they saw as a sort of cackling harridan that didn't inspire much awe, whereas Donald Trump, mentioned in rap videos for decades, was promising them economic opportunity and the ability to be a little less PC in their language. And so he won over a larger plurality of them than pretty much any Republican president for a fair few decades now. And so they might be wondering, well, okay, is Barack Obama actually a net asset? And is Michelle Obama's path to the White House, should she need to run against J.D. Vance because the Democrats have nobody else, better off without him? Possibly.
And what is very interesting, though, Connor, is I also think the bubble has burst on Michelle Obama well and truly, because for a long time, she was the great hope of the Democratic Party, the idea that she could follow Barack and become the first female president of the US. But so much has changed. So much has changed in just a matter of months. And this week, she launched a podcast on YouTube. Now, I know all about that. I know how difficult it is. And we've had a huge amount of success here. You'd think Michelle Obama, right, with her massive public profile, a huge amount of marketing push behind this, would be an immediate success. But oh no, The numbers are actually deeply embarrassing. Now, before I get analysis on it, let me just show you, Connor, exactly what this podcast is about. It's an odd one. It's her with her brother, Craig. This was the promo that was put out before the launch of the podcast.
Hey, TikTok, it's Michelle Obama, and I'm here with my big brother, Craig.
Hey, everybody.
We're here because we're excited to announce the launch of our new podcast called IMO with Michelle Obama and Craig Robinson.
And we just posted the trailer if you want to check it out.
Check it out. Thanks, you guys. See you soon.
And then the first episode itself, Connor, was so uninspiring. A lot of people saying, what? This was the woman who Democrats thought was going to save us? And I have to admit, it is like something has changed. There's zero charisma around her. Watch.
Post White House and writing the books and doing book tours, speaking at leadership conferences, things you do as a coach, you realize that what we have, even in our lack of resources, in our household growing up, we had people who would share their opinions, give us advice. We had mentors, and we were used to mentoring and being mentored. And I realized that a lot of people don't have that. They don't have a safe place to come sometimes,
right,
where they feel comfortable being vulnerable and asking hard questions, or they don't have people in their lives they trust. They are lone wolves, or maybe they have contentious relationships where they're estranged from the people they could rely on.
Estranged from the people you could rely on. Wonder who she's talking about there, Connor. But you can understand why it's been a flop, right? Like, actually, was the whole phenomenon around Michelle just an MSM creation?
Well, that clip was entirely bereft of content, Dan. I know Joe Rogan's once joked before that Kamala Harris speaks in gypsy curses. She's that incomprehensible. I think Michelle Obama's getting pretty proximate. Look, you couldn't pay me to listen to that, even if you gave me a couple of $1 million for USAID. And I wonder, since that's been cut, why so many people have stopped watching it in the first place. But I have noticed that at the same time she's launching this, Gavin Newsom, the very unpopular American psycho waxwork running California, has also launched a podcast. And what's savvy about his one is he keeps bringing on sort of popular MAGA faces like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon on for debates, so kind of siphoning off viewing figures from the ascendant MAGA culture. So he's recognizing that the Democrats doubling down on identity politics and appointing morons like Jasmine Crockett to be their congressional candidates has put them in a political cul-de-sac with radioactively unpopular social policies. And so he's trying to make himself proximate, seem more reasonable, open lines of dialogue to the hegemon, Trump, MAGA, etc. And it's just interesting he launches that at the same time, because the other person who was rumored, of course, last presidential cycle to take over from Kamala Harris, perhaps even on Michelle Obama's ticket, was Gavin Newsom. So I'm wondering if they're trying to astroturf this media bid for both of them to open the avenue up for a joint ticket, looking like a safe pair of hands, a return to normalcy for the Democrats come 2028, 2029, when they've got to face the formidable alliance of J.D. Vance and whichever MAGA loyalist we hope succeeds in their respective position and joins him as a VP to continue on Trump's term.
Well, a lot of people saying now, at the moment, you'd have a great ticket with J.D. Vance at the head of it and Donald Trump Jr. as the VP, just to keep that Trump connection going. So who knows? I mean, there's a long way to go, but it's got to be JD, doesn't it? It's got to be JD. Fascinating analysis as ever. Connor Tomlinson, you're brilliant. So good to have you, and we will speak very soon. Now, it is time to reveal the worst Britain in the world this week. But before we get there, let me just remind you of the nominees. Zia Youssef, the Reform UK chairman. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary. This is really interesting, of course, because one person on the right, three on the left, they were the winners of Union Jackass throughout the week. Got some of your comments here, actually. Check out now. Said, I can't even understand what Yusuf is doing in the Reform Party. He doesn't stand for any of their policies, so he must be some kind of stalking horse for the slam. Black Sky Irregular 9876 said, the Growler takes top spot for me this week for pushing so hard to build houses on beautiful countryside. Of course, the Growler. Oh, that's a little reference to Angela Rayner. Tony Green, 6185, says, Lammy, always out in front. His anti-Britain stance will never change as he doesn't see himself as British. His words in effect. Therefore, from the very core of any assessments of the worst Britain, he wins hands down every week. And Dogstar 18E says, Rayner's shafted the farmers again. The others come equal second. They all crawled out from the bottom of the heap. Okay, these results are very, very interesting. So, in fourth place with 11% of the vote, Yvette Cooper. In third place with 23% of the vote, Angela Rayner. The runner-up with 30% of the vote, David Lammy. However, according to nearly 30,000 of you, the worst Briton in the world this week is Zia Yusuf, chairman of the Reform UK Party, with 35% of the vote. I know that's going to be very controversial for some of you, but as I say, not my choices, all down to you. Now, coming up in the Uncancelled After Show, we have Angela Levin on Substack, www.outspoken.live. Just before we get there, though, I want to tell you about an extraordinary clash that we hosted on the show yesterday between Lady Colin Campbell and Narinder Kaur. I predicted it was going to kick off. I didn't quite know how badly. You can watch this right now if you do sign up on Substack, www.outspoken.live. We will also be premiering the video on YouTube tomorrow. Here's a little taster. Is Meghan Markle racist?
I have heard enough now. You are weak and you are pathetic. Not only are you offensive, you're ignorant. I object to race baiters. You're coming across to me as a terrible race baiter. Shut up. I'm gonna finish. Enough now. Just be quiet.
Yes, it kicked off. It kicked off. So www.outspoken.live. You can watch Lady Colin Campbell versus Narinder Kaur there now. And Angela Levin with me live in just a couple of minutes. Thank you so much for your company all week. We're back 5 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on Monday. Hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and Rumble. Most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you.